June. Usually I'm okay. Usually I talk about the library. I'm Linda Hewitt from the Red Bank Public Library, and I tell you things that are going on. But tonight I wanted to just tell you a few things that happened during the month of June. One of the things that we always talk about is using our voice. People have the tendency to say that, oh, the government is, does this, and they act like they have no say in doing anything. And if anything was ever proven to be more false, it was during the month of June. I had the privilege of attending the Community Historical Marker Unveiling ceremony in Eatontown at Wampum Park, and perhaps some of you were there also. I mean, this was something that Kerwin worked on, Patty worked on. I'm not sure who else is with us tonight. Rick Gefkin worked on. Many, many people worked on this project for about a year and a half. And it was, a tribute to Samuel Johnson, who was nicknamed Mingo Jack, who had been a jockey at Monmouth Park. And it was the first recorded lynching ever done in the state of New Jersey. I'm sure it probably isn't the only lynching, but it was recorded in Eatontown. And there was a committee that decided to commemorate Samuel Johnson and there had been a little plaque that was in the back of the park. You saw all the veterans in the front of the park. And if you weren't looking for the marker of Samuel Johnson, quite frankly, you would never have seen it. Now there's a large marker that commemorates Samuel Johnson, who was lynched in 1860. Was it Kerwin 67?
1886.
1886. Well, I will tell you, when I left the park that day, there was just such a feeling of peace. It was just so beautifully done. From the music to the flowers that were put at the marker at the end of the ceremony, it was just a wonderful, wonderful tribute. And after I went to that, I went to a Juneteenth celebration that they did in Johnny Jazz Park. And it was the first time I think they had done that, the first of many, I hope. But it just made me feel that the things being done on the local level now, we can make a difference. I mean, both of these things, especially what was done in Eatontown, was as good as anything I've ever attended. And it was a really, really great day. So I encourage you to get out into your communities, get involved in these events, and for heaven's sakes, use your voice. Educate people about what's going on in our country. Also, with that said, tonight we were supposed to do a program on environmental.
Linda,
yes.
One sec. I'm gonna just show the picture of the marker, if you don't mind.
No, I would like that.
Nice.
It was just great, and you can see all the people in the background. I mean, people started gathering. It started at, I think it was 11 o'clock, and they started gathering like a little after 9, actually. It was a great event. And we, in fact, still have the soil display collection at the library, so you can come in. That will be there through at least June. And I think they're keeping it at T. Thomas Fortune House for good. You'll be able to go in and see the display. And Kerwin, there's still things being done, correct, as far as events and things?
Yes, the soil is still traveling the state through March of 2023. And so if there's a venue that may want to host it for a time, you can reach out to us, let us know, and we can come and do programs or events to talk about it. Like we have one coming up at the Long Branch Library on July 6th, where we'll do a presentation as they unveil it. And then educational events will continue to happen as we still talk about what was going on.
Yeah, it was just great. It was really good. Also, we have at the library quilts by storytellers in cloth, Gloria Douglas and Michelle Williams. Michelle has moved to Texas, but these two ladies did a lot of quilting programs in the state for over a decade. As far as telling the story of slavery in quilts, the quilts are absolutely beautiful. We don't have room to display the really large quilts that they have, but I encourage you to come in and take a look at them. Also, I wanted to say, I started to say that tonight we were supposed to have Chief Vincent Mann with us to talk about environmental racism, which is a subject that we have discussed in this program in various programs, but we were specifically looking at Indigenous nations and how environmental racism has been, what has been done to Indigenous lands. And unfortunately, we had to change our program to what we have tonight because even though the dumping of the lands began in Bergen County around the Ringwood mines, Ford began to dump hazardous chemicals from its Mahwah plant. At that time, really nothing was done about it. People were poisoned, people got sick from the water, people got sick from the crops, but it's been done again. And you could have heard if you listened to WNYC, Vincent Mann was actually interviewed and did an interview yesterday twice about what's happening. The good news is that the state of New Jersey is suing the Ford Motor Company for doing this. So this time around, hopefully there'll be, some ability to restore some of the land. They're also starting a farm in Sussex County, so they'll be able to have crops and things growing there. But environmental racism is a very real problem, and we hope to have that program in July, if we're lucky, because right now he's very, very busy just trying to fight what's been happening up in North Jersey. And that's really all I have to say tonight. I'm going to turn the program over to Claire. Claire is a member of the Red Bank Public Library staff, Claire Phelps, and she's going to introduce Patty White and Kerwin, and also we have Walter Greason with us tonight to talk about Juneteenth. Again, thanks for joining us. Claire?
Thank you so much, Linda, and good evening, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us tonight for another program. We do have a wonderful program tonight. I'm going to go ahead and introduce Patty White, who will bring us a short video from Columbia University on why we actually celebrate Juneteenth. And then we can go on and discuss further. And I'll turn it over to you, Patty. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thanks everyone for joining us. We selected this little video. It's a short 12-minute plus video created at Columbia University called "What Does Juneteenth Mean to You?" So I'm gonna share the screen now so we can all enjoy the historical comments and the personal comments of people from Columbia University and hopefully give us some food for thought. Here we go.
I was born in Houston, raised in Dallas. Juneteenth was always a very present holiday. I didn't necessarily know what that meant. I understood it as like the Black 4th of July.
In the firmament of all of our cultural observances, Juneteenth wasn't that big a thing in Virginia and even less so in New York.
Slavery was not discussed in the household, and it certainly wasn't taught in the schools.
A friend of mine who had first learned about Juneteenth did so through the news, and she was shocked by it, and she had texted me and said, I can't believe that this is something I never learned about, and did you know about Juneteenth? I of course did, and I explained to her how I learned about Juneteenth.
Since the year 2000, I've been aware it's Juneteenth. Let me get myself into somebody's church this Sunday, or let's see if there's some kind of special thing going on.
As a young adult, I moved to Texas, and within a year or two is when I started to hear about Juneteenth. and I started to discover this history. And the thing is that's ironic is that I had actually studied US and Latin American history in college, and again, had never heard about Juneteenth. So moving to Texas really opened my eyes.
In thinking about Juneteenth, I decided to look up Major General Gordon Granger's General Order Number 3, which he read to the freed people of Galveston, Texas on June 19th, 1865. And it reads like this: "The people of Texas are informed that, in accordance with a proclamation from the Executive of the United States, all slaves are free. This involves an absolute equality of personal rights and rights of property between former masters and former slaves, and the connection heretofore existing between them becomes that between employer and hired labor. The freedmen are advised to remain quietly at their present homes and work for wages. They are informed that they will not be allowed to collect at military posts and that they will not be supported in idleness either there or elsewhere."
The thing about Juneteenth that I think is interesting is that it wasn't the most common celebration of Emancipation Day. The most common was January 1st, the date of the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863, and there are incredible descriptions of that from Frederick Douglass and all kinds of other people, because those celebrations started on January 1, 1863, and they're incredibly well documented. Big, organized celebrations, because it was anticipated. There was a preliminary proclamation, so they knew it was coming. People were waiting at the telegraph office to relay the news that it was actually signed and official.
My family has a kind of special connection to Juneteenth, in particular to Juneteenth in Texas. I'm fortunate that my partner really took it upon herself to study and explore and investigate African American history in Austin, Texas. And through her research and interviews and so forth, she was able to uncover the original site of the first Juneteenth celebration in Austin, Texas, which is actually the site of the Rosewood projects in Austin, which were one of the very first housing projects in the United States.
Juneteenth was a term that I first heard when I was sitting squirreled up in the library at Harvard University, looking for the obscure publications of Ralph Ellison. His story of 1965, I discovered in about 1970, 71. And I can remember patting my feet and shaking my head as I read this story, which is really a rendering of a performance of a sermon, Juneteenth. But that was my first encounter with it.
In terms of Juneteenth recognition, last year in 2020, the year of the George Floyd, killing, during the pandemic, there seemed to be an explosion of creative expression around Juneteenth. And on that day, I actually had a couple things happening. One, I participated in a number of art openings, but two, participated in a march and a protest that was orchestrated by artists. And it was, it included multidisciplinary artists, musicians, performing artists in terms of the theater, as well as visual artists.
2020 was a tipping point to some degree because the activism really started when Trayvon Martin was murdered by George Zimmerman and when Zimmerman was set free by the courts. So what you see now is 7 years of this iteration of athletic activism, particularly those really pushed by Black athletes. And so in doing the work of amplifying and supporting and doing the mobilizing work around Black Lives Matter, around the need to protect the vote in the More Than a Vote campaign, for example, the convergence of those forces allowed the space for this holiday, which has always certainly been celebrated since emancipation, to become this moment of galvanized political energy. And I think that's how we understand Juneteenth's role in that, in the summer, the incredible summer of athletic activism and activism in general in the United States in 2020.
My plan for celebrating Juneteenth this year is to do some sort of activity in Harlem, and I do know that there tend to be a lot of special events and usually readings, the readings of works by Toni Morrison, Ralph Ellison, and I'm hoping to partake in that.
The mood of the day for me is one of jubilation. It really is around celebration. It is about, reading about the day, talking about the day, and really thinking about what it means to be a descendant of enslaved peoples in America and how far we've come.
From a personal perspective, my favorite part about Juneteenth and just really any holiday is food. I always look forward to eating, especially when I go back home. That's the best part. My mama's peach cobbler is one of the best things. She passed away when I was in middle school, and so a few of the aunts have tried to replicate it, some more successful than others, so I'm excited for that.
Martin Luther King Day is now an institution in our country, and I think we have an opportunity to make Juneteenth one of those sorts of institutions that is doing something a little different than Martin Luther King Day, right? Martin Luther King Day really highlights, right, civil rights activism, right, political activism. I think Juneteenth should, as a national holiday, and here even locally, as it is, as we see even here in Harlem already, it is a cause for celebrating the institutions, the community institutions that enable Black and other marginalized communities in this city to survive. And this is going to be very important as we move through this pandemic moment, right?
You don't have to know a lot, I think, if you're at all a progressive-minded and inclusive person, to say that if the Declaration of Independence was one of the founding days and documents of the United States, then the emancipation of enslaved people, when they finally got to share that claim on being a free American with those equal rights, how can that not be regarded as an equally founding moment? So I think for better and for worse, in many ways maybe for better, we're in a moment where that's an open contest and people's vote is going to be publicly noted. And so I just think there's a lot of energy behind it, and some of that energy seems to be focusing on Juneteenth. Like, let's come together as a country and recognize that this was an important day, not just for the descendants of enslaved people in the United States, but for all of us who are Americans who think that the Declaration of Independence meant something and has to mean something in the future.
This is a really opportune time for non-white folks to do coalition building and to really come together and say that we have this shared history, whether you are Latinx, whether you are Arab-American, whether you are South Asian, like if you're not white or you're not very light-skinned and white passing, like you have an experience that is very unique in America, that you know what it is to feel othered, to feel like you don't belong, to walk through this world feeling as though you have something to prove to other folks. And so I think, again, more broadly, Juneteenth is about not just embracing the history of Black Americans, but embracing the history of non-white folks in general in this country and saying, hey, we have to band together and really honor and acknowledge that we do have this shared history of facing discrimination, facing some form of racism, harassment, and some form of othering, some form of feeling as though we are inferior or less than simply because of the color of our skin.
The great physicist Professor Barad says, with a nucleus, we can blow up the Earth. But we can also recognize an entire network of life in a single atom, in a single nucleus of an atom. If we can recognize our oneness, and as Glissant says, give consent to the fact that we are the same people, that I am you and you're different from me, that makes us still part of a unity that we all share. Then I think the Juneteenth celebration will take off for everybody and not just be the Black thing that we identify with, but the human thing that we all have to strive for.
I'm pleased that Columbia is recognizing this day, first of all. And last year, I was quite surprised because it brought back into focus, the opportunity to really start to have dialogue around it. And I think by having this day as a day of recognition, I think it starts to instigate dialogue. So I would hope that Columbia would start a dialogue around what this means. And it goes back to the point I made about this being an Independence Day of sorts, but really talking about really what does independence really mean for the formerly enslaved?
Our recognition of this holiday nationally comes after global protests after the murder of George Floyd, of Breonna Taylor, of so many others. That's just to mention the year 2020. And so there's almost disconnect between a celebration of something from 150 years ago, which actually didn't quite materialize. All the dreams of freedom didn't quite happen the way we had hoped. But then also, one is left struggling to understand how Juneteenth speaks to the current moment. That one wonders, will it take another how many decades before we can celebrate freedom from structural racism, from police brutality and murder, from crippling debt that, really preys upon the poor of all colors, but particularly Black communities. One wonders in one's darker moments, maybe it'll be on June 20th when we have to make, maybe we'll forget this for one day, but one wonders, how long will it be that freedom actually is truly realized? Happy Juneteenth.
Okay. Thank you so much, Patty, for that insightful video with very insightful talking points regarding Juneteenth. And so now I would like to turn the discussion over to Reverend Kerwin Webb, and he will go on and take it from here.
Hello and good evening, everybody. Thanks for being here. I'm here along with an esteemed friend and colleague, Dr. Walton Grayson, who is a historian and someone who what I'd like for us to do is to engage in a dialogue about what we've seen, what we know, what we understand. But before I get too far blabbering, I want to invite Dr. Grayson to say a couple of words if he wants, because he is someone who I respect dearly for his knowledge and commitment. And so, Dr. Grayson, greet us in your own special way.
Reverend Webb, the most Reverend Webb, blessed and highly esteemed. It is a joy to be here with you and these partners who have transformed our Red Bank community and set the tone for our entire state. The Let's Talk About Racism events are a model that I take to places like Florida and California and Texas, and we build carbon copies where young people and old people come together and they say, we want something different. And so when you watch the cable news, there's a lot of stress and angst and worry about where we're headed as a country. But because of all of you, I believe in a better future. And so that's why I'm here. It's a joy to be back here tonight, especially in the wake of the recognition of Samuel Johnson. And I think back to Gary Suretsky. I don't know if everybody in the room knows Gary Suretsky, but a longtime county archivist who published a newsletter called Old Monmouth Times. And he was the first to really go into the archive and discover the newsprint and start to talk about this case of the lynching of Mingo Jack. And when I sat down and talked with him, it was around late 1999, and we were talking about all kinds of, and he pulled out the newsletter and he's like, you have to write about this. And this was one of those moments in my dissertation process where there are lots of really important discoveries, but that particular incident, and to see how it has marshaled the strength of this community, has brought the nation's attention to bring the folks from the Equal Justice Initiative to begin to make this marker a part of what will stand here forever. The work has massive ongoing implications, and it's because of what we do in conversations like this tonight. And so in the wake of a Juneteenth, that was also Father's Day, and we had this historical marker. This is the best place I could be. I'm just sorry I can't be there in person. I made my promise to the folks running things that you give me a heads up, I will jump on the plane. So let's do this more often in the year ahead.
Awesome. So I want to begin this dialogue, and we're just going to talk through the video, through Juneteenth. And as we're talking, if things hit you, things come up, put questions in the chat, raise your digital hand, and we can make this more of a conversation as opposed to just a presentation. But use your digital hands or your regular hands. How many of you before, let's say 5 years ago, how many of you knew anything about Juneteenth? 5 years ago. Thank you, thank you. Not a lot. Not a lot, because it wasn't something that had reached critical mass yet. And it's only been within the last couple of years with the high-profile murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, when the nation was really saying, what is going on? Do people start paying attention to things that have been happening since, I think 1980 is when Texas made Juneteenth a state holiday. And there were various other states that adopted it as a state holiday, but generally the response from people was, what is that? Why are you doing that? Why do we need it? And we saw in the video that there was a couple of people said, I studied US history and I knew nothing about Juneteenth. Slavery wasn't talked about at home, and it certainly wasn't talked about in the schools. But there's one thing in that video that I centered in on when I heard it, and it was when the guy was reading Gordon Granger's General Order Number 3. Now, couple of things. This was June 19th, 1865. Emancipation for those in that region began January 1, 1863. Right? So 2.5 years. 2.5 years it took to get information to the people in Galveston, Texas. Now, I know we didn't have high-speed trains or planes, or, you know, we didn't have the Acela train and all of those things, but 2.5 years? I wonder why it took 2.5 years. But then also think about this. The person who went down, the person who read the order, was a general in the Union Army. Why might that have been? Somebody take a guess. Anybody, nobody? The army had to go. Oh, go ahead.
He needed guns.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The people of Texas were not going to just simply allow our property, our resources, our way of life to just walk out free. Right? And so in the order, he says, you know, by the order of the executive, all of the slaves are here now free, and now the relationship is that of employer and hired labor. But that second part of the order is what stuck out in my mind. It said that you are to remain quietly at your present home and work for the people that were just enslaving you. Mm-hmm. And then it says, you are not to gather at military posts, and you will not be supported in idleness there or elsewhere. So it kind of gives this perception that, all right, you're free now, but you're just gonna go and be lazy. And you should just basically stay where you are, and then, you know, have a contractual relationship with these people who've been oppressing you, beating you, selling you. But that was the mentality, even of those who were coming to liberate the slaves of Galveston, Texas. Mm-hmm. Couple of interesting points, and Dr. Grayson, jump in anytime. Couple of interesting points is the Emancipation Proclamation that Abraham Lincoln signed that went into effect January 1, 1863. It liberated those enslaved persons where? In states that were in rebellion against the Union.
Okay.
Now, Here's what's interesting about New Jersey, and this kind of goes into the Samuel Johnson conversation and the historical marker. Even after Juneteenth, June 19th, 1865, slavery was still legal in New Jersey. Slavery in New Jersey did not get outlawed until January of the following year. So, how does that sit with any of you? Just thoughts about just that little bit that we have unpacked. First reactions.
Hi, this is Claire Garland.
Hi, Claire.
In some of my readings through the years, one bit of information was that the enslaved people that broke away or found themselves freed started following the armies. They followed Sherman's armies. And what happened was they didn't have enough food for any of the people. And so they had masses of people, hundreds and hundreds of families following the armies wherever they were going, trying to be of service. So of course, the army could use some of the people, labor and that sort of thing, but they just didn't have the resources to feed everybody and take care of them. So I think they learned what happened in Georgia and along the Eastern Seaboard, that they had to do something different in the West, in Texas. So that's probably why they decided to try to keep the people, let them stay there until they were able to sort them out and find employment and find ways. Because if they were on farms that were producing things and part of the economy, you didn't want that to collapse, because the whole economic structure would collapse too if they were producing food or whatever it was. So I think they went to it gradually because they recognized the problem of just releasing all these people. Even here in Fairhaven, there's a story about enslaved people that the Quakers wanted to release somebody on a farm in Fairhaven. And the rules of New Jersey said, well, you've got to put up a bond, and you've got to do this, and you got to do that, and you got to make sure they're going to be fed and they're going to have money to live on. In other words, you just couldn't turn people loose and then expect the state to support them. The state didn't want the financial responsibility of supporting women and children who had no means of taking care of themselves. So, the whole thing is economics, And I didn't mean to interrupt your talk, but.
No interruption at all. This is great. Thank you. I see Dr. Grayson smiling. He's got thoughts.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, there's a lot to unpack in both the questions and the comments. I don't want to take a whole time because I do want it to be free flowing. A couple of the questions that got put into the chat on forces in Texas that brought about a state holiday. Keep in mind, this does not become a federal state holiday until last year. So it was really in response to what Kerwin was talking about, is this sense of outrage over ongoing state violence and police killing. So that's what happened there. And you actually had bipartisan. It was both Senator John Corwin and from the state of House of Representatives, it was Sheila Jackson Lee, who led the effort to get the federal recognition for the holiday that we celebrated really for the first time this year. And then to Patty's question about resistance and delay in implementing, this is certainly partially about the delay in travel and how does the mail service work and the telegraph line. But yeah, Kerwin's point is exactly right, that there's a resistance. There are widespread bans on Black people learning to read for exactly this reason, that their ability to resist and to take their own self-interest further was enforced by law, and people could have an eye gouged out or a hand cut off for attempting to gain literacy. So the brutality of the violence in the period should not be underestimated in making sure that African Americans could not learn any of the surrounding circumstances of their conditions. In the question about the economy, I just wanted to point out some of the pieces that not many people know unless you teach history every day. The Confederacy began facing large numbers of African Americans fleeing plantations within 3 months of when the war broke out, despite these efforts to prevent people from learning what was going on. They still found out. They would hear people whisper about, oh, the conflict and what was happening, particularly along the Eastern Seaboard. And so this was not something that the Emancipation Proclamation provoked. It was a recognition that there was already a need for a policy because African Americans were in fact freeing themselves as early as July of 1861. And so this leads to the decision in September of 1862 to say, yes, we need a proclamation and we're going to have it take effect January 1st of 1863. So you're talking about almost a year and a half from when people are fleeing plantations to when Lincoln takes this kind of military statement and position to say, wherever the Union Army goes, there will be an emancipation effect. There will be notice that that slavery will no longer continue to function. Now, the economic effect of this, and here I'm going to cut out about half of a 40-minute piece that I do around this topic. By the time you see the effect of the proclamation, it becomes what Du Bois, W.E.B. Du Bois, refers to in 1935 as the general strike. Really important concept here, that the entire labor force of the South stops working, and their primary product was cotton. And in trying to market that cotton, that was their way of negotiating with France and Britain for international support. Without a new cotton crop coming in 1862 and 1863, the Southern economy is already collapsing. Such to the point that in 1863, if you had one Confederate dollar that would buy you a loaf of bread in January of 1863, by the end of the year, that same loaf of bread would cost you 25 Confederate dollars. Now, you think it's bad when we got $6 gas.
Yeah.
Think about if we had, instead of $3 gas, with $4 gas, we had $75 to $100 per gallon gas. That was Confederate inflation across 63 into 64. And then because of the accelerating departure of African Americans to the Union lines, the inflation peaked at over 7,200%. 7,200%. So multiply 25 times 72, and that's how much that loaf of bread cost you at the end of 1864. The power of the African American population in that region of the country, and really in most of the United States, was that their labor drove the way local currency was valued. And so that piece of it is actually a specialty of mine, and I can talk for a really long time about it. But that piece is what's actually driving the collapse of the Southern economy. And it's not so much that these folks are starving, they're sick, that is true, but they're also the primary agricultural workers in the United States. When you see this group moving across Georgia, they can feed themselves. They know where to find food. They built the roads. They maintain the farms. And so the destitution and the sense, I'll draw it back to the New Jersey piece. And I say this every time I do a talk here, please never use the phrase gradual emancipation. That's the way the law was written. That was not actually what was going on from 1804. It was extended enslavement. There was an extension of how people could be enslaved going forward because the use of them as currency was so important. That's why we still have people held in bondage in the state at the time of the Civil War. And so this extended enslavement ties back to the economic conversion that's happening in New Jersey as we're building up Newark and Trenton and Patterson and Camden. The money that's financing these expansions is made out of trading Africans into Delaware and Maryland and Virginia. And so always understand enslavement as an economic process. That's how most of what we consider the Anglophone, the English-speaking United States is established. is the trade in Africans as currency. And then the trade in tobacco and cotton and sugar just builds on top of that. So it's important to kind of disentangle a lot of this, but it's why I'll be really frank, even as segregation evolves in the state, it's still predicated on extracting economic value from first African Americans at the base of the economy, but then from immigrants, from people coming from Southern and Eastern Europe. And so there's a way that the system is designed to extract value from people who don't have education, who don't have skills, so that those of the people who do can build up enormous amounts of wealth.
Thank you.
Rick
Rick.
Gefkin?
Yeah.
Rick Gefkin has a question.
Yeah, a comment if I may. Thank you very
Okay.
much. And to segue off both Claire and what we just heard from Walter, that thing that Kerwin picked up is really important about telling the newly freed freedmen and women to remain where they are. Yes, it's an economic viability, okay? They don't want these farms, plantations, et cetera, down south especially to be abandoned. But it also presages what happens after this brief period after the Civil War, in that the slave codes start to get, black codes start to get passed. And among those, and this reminded me exactly of that, is laws throughout the South against vagrancy. And that was designed to do a couple of things. One, it was designed to keep people working for their former enslaved masters. And then secondly, if they were caught being vagrant without a place to live and a home that they could show to the authorities, they were then forced into what became eventually huge prison farms, Parchment Farm, et cetera, where now you have slavery again, but just disguised as law breaking, and therefore these people are put to work again. So, this insidiousness of ongoing enslavement by other names, as Walter points out, continues everywhere, especially down south, but as he points out correctly, here in New Jersey and other places as well.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
So the question from Gloria, what's the thing about not being able to hang out at military bases? I think Dr. Grayson sort of touched on that. You pretty much did, Dr. Grayson, or is there something else that needs to go with that?
I mean, just understand there's not bases the way we think of them today. And I don't want to go too far off the rails with this. But a camp, there are these mobile camps. And so they need labor as the troops move back and forth. And so that basically is, they're not supposed to come and stay there. This is why Granger is asking them to stay on the existing plantations in the interior of Texas, up near what we think of as Houston. Houston was all slave plantations in the 1860s and 1870s. And so to come down to Galveston, which is right on the water, it's certainly a logistical nightmare for the general. But that's not going to stop the people. The actual celebration that happens is much more about family reunion. They're not paying no never mind to this person, tell them to go back and work where they had been imprisoned for their entire existence. So yeah, there's that order is there, but that's not what becomes the core of the celebration.
Thanks.
Bonnie had a question or a comment. She said, I think in New Jersey, we need to continue to put that date of the New Jersey emancipation in front of people each year at Juneteenth, so we realize the fallacy that it all happened in the South, which a lot of people are not aware of, the New Jersey.
So some people may not know that Bonnie is part of the Social Justice Coalition that helped us do the work. So I want to put her on the spot and say more, Bonnie. Say more about what you mean and why that thought came up.
Well, I just think that, we're having a celebration, right, in New Jersey. So we celebrate Juneteenth, where in other states, slaves were set free, and yet at the time ours were still not free. So in reality, it's almost like we shouldn't be able to celebrate Juneteenth in New Jersey because it didn't happen on Juneteenth. It didn't happen till later. So it's like this irony between, we're celebrating freedom, but we didn't give it. We, the white people, didn't give it until later. So it's I think that it's easy to sit on your laurels and say, oh, New Jersey let everybody free before Juneteenth, because that's sort of the implication, is that Texas was the last, but it wasn't.
Okay. Very good point. Very good point, because I actually didn't know that either. And so that's interesting for New Jersey history. It really is.
Yeah, so only because this is some of the work that I've done, and I find it interesting. We know that New Jersey was a state that voted against the 13th Amendment abolishing slavery. So New Jersey was, yes, the last state to end slavery, and it was known as the slave state of the North, because so much economic interest in enslaved people were here. A lot of our institutions, a lot of the families and wealth that we know were built on the backs of people who were held in bondage. Princeton University, Princeton Seminary, these places benefited from slave labor. And within the last 5 years or so, they've begun looking at their complicity in the American slave trade and the American Colonization Society, which is the society that was going to ship Africans back to Africa, so that because there were thoughts that there was no way that whites and blacks could be civilized and live together, and so they were going to ship all of us back over to where we came from. If I'm not mistaken, the American Colonization Society, which was a lot of landowners and really important people from New Jersey, helped establish the Liberia, because that was like the post where they were sending people back to. Dr. Grayson, Rick, if I'm misspeaking, please correct me, because I don't want people to leave with wrong information.
No, you're good. You're good.
So we have this long entanglement in the gradual emancipation thing. Hey, you know what? Slaves, you all can be free, but you have to serve in this period of bondage until you're 25 or 21, depending on if you're a man or a woman. And if you have a child, that child has to do the same thing. That extended period. And so, Bonnie, you're right. We cannot really celebrate because we were hypocrites in that. So here's what I want to ask. Should Juneteenth be a celebration or a period of mourning? Because, okay, you learned that you were free, but in actuality, you were freed 2.5 years before you found out. And that is indicative of the way that information and things trickle down to certain people. It takes a while to get there. So should we celebrate Juneteenth? I'm just curious.
I would just like to say, I do think it's important what one of the gentlemen at the end of the video said, where he was talking, and a couple of other people mentioned this as well, where he was talking about using this holiday, this celebration, and I do think it should be a celebration of our oneness, and recognizing that we are one family, that we are the same people. We should always acknowledge it is sort of a mixed, it has to be mixed emotions because of this history. Nevertheless, here we are today, and I think it's time for everyone who is not of African descent to step forward and be brothers and sisters to the descendants of the formerly enslaved. So I feel it has the potential to be very, very positive.
One of the things I had read when I was looking for research for the program, a quote was, "May we use Juneteenth as an opportunity to recommit to the values of equality and the dignity of every person." So if that was established, then it would be a reason to celebrate.
Gotcha.
Right, I agree. I wouldn't say, and as Patty said, I feel, mixed emotions when, you hear about it's going to be a federal holiday and everybody is yay, yay. For me, it wasn't really all that of a kumbaya movement of everything is solved, racism is over. No, it's not that. It's an awareness. At least there was an acknowledgement, and that is a huge step, just like what happened with Harvard University, but also to be mindful of where it came from and all, the work that still needs to be done, and not to just say, oh, we have a holiday now, we don't have anything else to do. And that's not the case. There's more to do, actually, I would say, and continue to do.
You know what, you're reminding me, so this year, the schools were off for Juneteenth, and my daughter was explaining to our grandson what Juneteenth is, and he said to her, "Wait a minute, this happened 150 years ago, and we're just getting around to making it a holiday." He was so shocked. So one of his classmates, when she found out, again, another 8-year-old, when she found out, oh, we have a day off, what's Juneteenth? And he just gave this snarky response. It's something we should have done 100 years ago. So I think that's one way of, reminding people that we have a lot of work to do.
Right.
Yeah. So I see go ahead, Bonnie.
I was just going to say, I find it interesting that 8-year-olds weren't told why they were having the Juneteenth holiday in school. We know why we're having the 4th of July. We know why we're having Thanksgiving. They didn't know why they were having Juneteenth off. Interesting.
How much of that was discussed in the schools? That's interesting. I'm not sure how much that was actually explained to them.
And let's be honest, there are schools and school districts where if you say that,
right,
it's illegal.
You will, right.
We are banning the thing that we would be talked about.
Exactly, illegal, all kinds of problems.
And we talked about before the program started at the library on Monday, we had a patron come into the library and ask Claire why we were closed the preceding Monday. And Claire explained to her we were closed for Juneteenth, and she made a gesture with her hand, like, how ridiculous kind of, gesture. And then I encouraged her to join us tonight for our program, which she didn't really care for. But, there are many people that don't want to know anything about what's happening.
Well, it's interesting. She must have had some knowledge or a little bit of a background as to what it entailed or who was involved.
Right.
Because she seemed to become so irate after that. And I didn't even get a chance to go on to explain what Juneteenth was. It was like she automatically knew that was something that, oh, I don't want to have anything to do with this, and waved her hand at me and turned around and said, this is ridiculous. This is a person that I've seen several times prior to this day. Wow. And she just, her whole face turned. So I said, she knows what it's about and she knows who is involved with this. Okay. And this is her feeling.
Yeah. Dr. Grayson?
Just quickly, because I don't get to talk in Jersey very much anymore.
Okay.
So I wanted to throw out that for folks who want to continue to look into news stories, untold stories about this kind of history, a couple of places to start to dig into are in Western Monmouth. Work that I'm very happy to see that has started to expand is about a place called Pergolaville. It was run by the Grillo family for about 40 years between 1930 and 1970. Pergolaville is built over in Mcneil Township, just outside of Englishtown. And it was essentially a slave labor camp. Black people were held there with no running water, no electricity, extraordinarily poisonous conditions. The first real photograph of folks living there just surfaced, I think, 2 years ago. So if folks want to track that down, the company that also brought a large number of very, very poor Black migrant labor to the region was Duckett and Laird, was essentially a fuel company in rural communities. And so if you start looking at the larger farmers, Joseph Brakeley had a large farm in Freehold Township. They all rely on really cheap migrant immigrant labor that built on the same kinds of practices that we're talking about that came through the 19th century. And the only reason I came to know any of this is that I lived there, and that I had an older relative who lived with me who would describe the labor conditions about getting whipped and getting beaten while they were trying to grow and harvest crops. And his story went right up through the late 1960s. So less than a decade before I was born, people were still treated brutally. And there are still companies that benefited from those monies over the course, you know, a lot of it's getting built over, like even Monroe Township now is getting built over. But digging into those land records, you'll start to see the patterns. And if you know young people who want to come and do this work, my whole department is working on it. So if you want to get students who are in middle school or high school that want to do these kinds of projects, just reach out to me at McAllister.
Walter, can you explain what you mean by what kind of work or projects would you be talking about?
Yeah, so we go through census data, and then we just got the 1950 census data was just opened up. So that's a really key year, is that you're seeing transitions in these agricultural systems, but you can still find out who owned what property and what kind of labor practices they were using. A lot of times when it's just statistical data from the 60s, 70s, and 80s, you can draw inferences based on the patterns, and that's a really useful social science tool. But the manuscript census data tells you individually who's in each household, what are they doing, how is it connected to their occupation. There really is no parallel or substitute for the manuscript census. And so we have thousands and thousands of new pages of data available that we're going to be sorting through for the next couple decades.
Wow, that's great work.
Very nice.
Very nice, thank you. I would like to kind of backtrack to a comment someone put in the chat. The AME Church played a strong role in the establishment of Liberia. And does anyone have any thoughts on that? Dr. Grayson?
Totally separate topic, but
right, I know.
So I would say Henry Mcneil Turner. Let me put that in the chat.
Okay.
Extraordinary minister. We love to talk about Richard Allen. Some folks will get into the middle of the 19th century, talk about Henry Highland Garnett as an abolitionist minister. Not enough people study Henry Mcneil Turner. He essentially internationalizes the AME Church, spends most of his career traveling to the Caribbean, traveling to South America, traveling to Africa, making the African Methodist Church this just juggernaut of a Black liberation institution through the late 19th century. The colleague of mine who writes the most about him is Andre Johnson down in Tennessee. I think he's about to take a position in Pennsylvania. But Turner, I'm trying to think who you could compare him to. So of course, like I can draw the contrast with T. Thomas Fortune. They're about the same time period. But Turner is a giant. He is a big, burly man, and he goes out in public, and when he speaks, it's with the same kind of force that Frederick Douglass talks with, that he will fill the room with his voice, and people are moved by the ministry. And he has no compunction about saying, oh, we should stay and fight for freedom in the United States. It's like, no, there's lots of other places we can go and build freedom on our own terms. And he is like, most people tend to think about Marcus Garvey as a Back to Africa advocate, but Garvey is only possible because of what Turner had done 30 years earlier. So Yeah, if you haven't read up on Turner and this idea about American colonization, it stretches back into the mid 18th century. You had primarily European advocates, but you also have African Americans who were like, yeah, this is not it. I mean, most famously in Monmouth County is Colonel Ty, who joins the British forces and basically leads raids. I'm amazed we don't tell more stories about Colonel Ty. Like for 2 years, he's leading a Nat Turner revolt and destroying plantations across Colts Neck and Holmdel. Like,
Wow.
like, can we make that movie tomorrow? So there's always this story of saying, yeah, no, this is not the be all end all to stay here and be part of this, whatever this United States thing is going to be. Ty inspires. It's when they leave New York in 1781, when the British Army leaves, over 10,000 Black people leave with them, going to Nova Scotia and back to the UK and ultimately back to the west coast of Africa. So there's a deep kind of Pan-African or Black nationalist trend across the African American experience that is not simply just stay and fight for civil rights.
Lovely.
That's interesting. That's a whole nother conversation to have. And thank you so much. There's so much history still to be unearthed. There really is.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Leslie put in the chat earlier, you are free and should have always been, not just a couple of years ago. This was back when I was saying that should we celebrate Juneteenth. Leslie, would you like to expand on that or add anything to it?
Is Leslie still with us?
Yes.
Hi.
Well, she may.
She has no mic. But she
she has
believes
no
in
mic. Okay.
reparations.
Oh,
All
okay.
right,
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
And then Cassandra talks about the Amistad curriculum not embraced in New Jersey, despite it being law. For over 20 years, it's been the law, and it's still a fight to get people talking about that, teaching about that in schools. Let me ask this. Now that we have the new state of New Jersey in 2020 recognized Juneteenth as a holiday, federal government, Joe Biden signed a law last year, making this year the first national holiday for Juneteenth. Is that good or bad? And I only ask that question because I've already seen there was a few weeks back before Juneteenth, Walmart got into a bit of trouble because they had put out some Juneteenth themed ice cream or in the ice cream flavors. And so the question or the reason that I'm asking good or bad is because now people are thinking, well, it's a day off. I can commercialize this. I can make money off of this. So is this helpful that it's been made a federal and state holiday because it's a way of celebrate and remember, or is it bad because it's just going to become, hey, we did that thing, now let's see how we can capitalize off of it? Just curious about thoughts.
So this is Rick. Can I make a comment?
Go for it.
Yes.
Okay, so it seems to me a couple of things are happening here. One, like most of us, especially white folks, we had no clue about the importance of Black culture in our history, whether New Jersey or across the country. So when you elevate holidays, Martin Luther King and Juneteenth now, you move the needle, however slightly, for other people who reluctantly have to go along. You know, they can't get to the library the day that they want to because now there's a celebration that they formerly didn't understand the importance of. Secondly, the nature of America is always commerce, it's always economics. We will turn everything into an opportunity to make money. You know, Cinco de Mayo is made up by the liquor companies, okay? No self-respecting Mexican's gonna celebrate Cinco de Mayo because it's got nothing to do with how we perceive it today. So, you know, certainly I wouldn't want Juneteenth to be commercialized, but it's my guess that it will be at some level. Maybe not now while the emotions are still raw, but eventually. But is that bad? I'm not so sure. If it gives people an opportunity to understand, however slightly, and celebrate something about Black American culture, which is a misnomer actually, because it's American culture, American history, then that's a step toward the positive. And the more of these that we accumulate, the better off we are.
Okay, good point. Thank you. Thank you.
This is Gloria. There, I think it's good. There will be people who just want the day off. You can't, just like the commercialization. But what it did for me is enlightened me a little and made me want to know more and made me want to ask questions. And it, there are a lot of people like, what's this Juneteenth? And it gives the opening to talk about it, and how much we don't know.
Yeah.
Not everybody's going to see that way, but I think there are a lot of people who do.
Very good. Very good. Other thoughts? This is good.
Other comments in the chat, excuse me, no one is troubled by honoring Columbus Day. Cassandra pointed that out. Leslie said, let people turn the holiday into something meaningful. And Bonnie pointed out that Dr. King Day, MLK Jr. Day, is a day of service. Can Juneteenth become a day of awareness and remembrance?
Yeah. Could I just say, as far as Columbus Day, I grew up where Christopher Columbus was a hero. And I will say now, my children were the first to tell me he was no hero. And I think many people are rethinking Christopher Columbus as a hero. I hope, my hope is that's the way history is going, that a lot of things that we thought were good, we're now learning they're not good. People that we thought, Europeans that came to our country and took the land away from Native Americans, and we cheered on the cowboys. We now know this is not good. And so I don't think Christopher Columbus is quite the hero that he used to be.
I agree. And Patty says most Indigenous peoples are troubled by Columbus Day, and it's not celebrated on many reservations here in the United States. And it's now referred to as Indigenous Peoples Day in many places.
There's a movement
that's important.
To happen, actually. Instead of Christopher Columbus Day, it would be a day to celebrate the Indigenous
people.
Good.
Very
so
good.
here's
Actually,
what
go
ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to add a little comment about Columbus Day, and please, Walter or Rick, since you're the historians, please correct me if I'm wrong, but the way I remember the story, and this was back, I think somewhere in the 1800s, many newly arrived immigrants from Italy were working in the South, and many of the local white people looked upon them rather negatively because many of them were very dark-skinned, and apparently there was some violence and lynchings of Italians. And I guess there was one particular episode that was so egregious that our government decided, well, we need to do something more positive to honor our Italian citizens, and chose Columbus as an Italian to honor. That's the way I remember hearing the story. I hope it's about right.
That's interesting. Leslie in the chat put Newark, for example. Yes, it's good to honor Italians. She'd vote for Sacco and Vanzetti Day, but she isn't sure that would actually go. So that's an interesting point, Patty, because I'd never heard that before about the origin of Columbus Day. Thank you.
Yeah, just a local note for folks, since everybody's around Red Bank.
Right.
Really great name to look up is Basil Bruno. I couldn't believe this story when I first came across it. Italian migrated to Red Bank and wanted to be in politics. Started running for public office, couldn't gain any traction. This is in 1921, 1922. Finally wins office in 1923 when he is endorsed by the Ku Klux Klan. And he campaigns on a nativist agenda to prevent more immigrants from coming to the United States. And so there's just a fascinating history of the Klan in New Jersey in the 1920s, and particularly when it comes to Italians in Red Bank and Asbury Park and Long Branch as well, that they were all, well, the west side of Red Bank was essentially a ghetto for Blacks and Italians. And so you look at the history of the T. Thomas Fortune House itself, and it's literally inscribed in the ownership of the building. And so that pattern of how, good friend of mine, Jennifer Guglielmo, wrote a book, How Italians Became White, and talks about the process between 1920 and 1970. And it's just a fascinating discussion. There's been a lot of new work published on that in the last 20 years. But yeah, Italians in the early 20th century were as thoroughly kind of rejected, despised, in danger for their lives as any other immigrant, and African Americans, Mexican Americans, Native Americans. Italians were killed and considered quote unquote filth in the eyes of Native white Americans.
Right, I heard that, right. Well, it just speaks to a whole universal theme of certain things.
Yeah.
How much
So I'm pleased by the fact that even with the challenges of commercialization and co-opting, that people believe Juneteenth is a good thing because it creates questions or conversations. It helps us to go deeper. And I would ask and challenge everyone who is here that we continue to make it such that it is not just something that, hey, this is a holiday, we just take the day off and we're done. Please make sure that we help educate those who may not know what it is, those who may not even want to hear what it is, if you can let them know. Because as we've heard on this Zoom tonight, there's a lot of history that is buried beneath our feet. There's a lot of history that has gone on around the places that we live and occupy that can help shape our understanding of how we came to be who we are. A lot of us do not know the different ingredients that made the United States what it is, made it look the way that it does, make it operate the way that it does. But conversations like these and digging into complex, difficult dialogues and being able to say, I don't know, can someone help me? Those signs and acts of humility can take us to a higher level as people, and they can help, I think, pull us back from the brink of where we are going.
Can I add something?
Yes, please.
This is Claire. Yes, I think Juneteenth gives society an opportunity to do something positive. Last week or so, working with the T. Thomas Fortune House and the Red Bank Chamber Music Society, they added an extra program which they held at the Methodist Church in Red Bank, which was very well attended. And they invited the Harlem Chamber players to play, African-American composers, and had a wonderful program. So I think it gave an opportunity to add something to their program, because they usually do 6 programs a year, and this was an extra program. They got funding and everything else for it. So it turned out to be a community event, chance for people to be together, a chance to learn of African-American composers, a chance to see African-American chamber players, which were excellent musicians, string players. And I just thought it was just such a wonderful community activity that wouldn't maybe have happened if it hadn't been in celebration. And the program was Juneteenth program.
Yeah.
So everybody there was there because of Juneteenth, a celebration.
Wonderful. Thank you for that, Claire. And I agree. I think it gives us an opportunity to live into the values that we profess as Americans. I don't think it's lost on anyone that there are challenges in our nation. And some of the things that happened, the enslavement of people, the exploitation, violence and brutality towards people, those things are only allowed to fester when people do not say anything about it. When we pretend that it doesn't happen, when we just allow things to go unchecked. And so by being a part of these conversations, you're educating yourselves to go out and help educate others. Because I really want to believe in the best of humanity and in Americans, and that most of the vilest things that happen are because many people are ignorant to their existence. Our hope, our job is to erase that ignorance so that we can actually change the trajectory of where we are going as people and as a nation. Because when we are together, it is so, just like Claire was talking about, the historical marker dedication ceremony. There were multiple people, different races, different genders, everything. It was beautiful. And the chamber, it was beautiful. And that can happen when we allow ourselves to be vulnerable enough to say, I don't know, let me learn about the other. So I want to personally thank you all for being part of the Let's Talk About Race program series. Each month you continue to come, and that helps us to continue to be better. And I think that this, like Dr. Grayson said, this model can help us as a community to change the way that people see the world, and in our own little way, help make the United States a better representation of a more perfect union. So I will let Dr. Grayson say his any final words, wrap ups, then we'll turn it back over to Claire and Patty and Linda.
Just thanks to you, Reverend, and everyone here. I love sitting with all y'all. Thank you so much for being here tonight, and I look forward to doing many more of these conversations with all of you.
Great job.
Very good. Okay, well, thank you to everyone. This was a wonderful program, in my opinion, and I think it's just opening up so many doors and opportunities, and it's very exciting for what we can discover, for the future. Thank you, Reverend Kerwin Webb. Thank you, Dr. Grayson. And we look forward to seeing everyone again, hopefully next month, and joining us and continuing to join us for our series. And now I'll turn it over to Patty, and if she has any final words.
Well, thank you. I don't think I have anything else to add. This was a wonderful program, except I do want to thank, just for everyone's knowledge, we do have a small volunteer committee here. Claire and Linda work at the library. Kerwin, Walter, and myself, and Rick Gefkin help with these programs as volunteers. And so we are always looking for ideas for future programs. Please reach out to us if you know of a good presenter or a good idea. We just really love engaging with you all.
Yeah, and I second that. We have committee meetings, and if you are interested, you can always send me an email. We'd love to have you with us. We could not do this program without all the people that attend the program. I mean, we will be doing this 7 years in August. At some point, we hope to come back to the library and do a hybrid version. But I mean, we have run the gamut of programs. And I mean, when we first started, we would have like 70 people coming to the library for our programs. And despite the pandemic and saying we would have to stop the program, we started it virtually. And again, I mean, we have had people follow us through the 7 years, and people volunteering like Walter and Patty and Kerwin. We couldn't do this without you. So thank you very, very much. And it's a better world than we're led to believe, because there is some progress being made, as we can see from all the things that are happening. So thanks again for being with us. And our next program is July the 27th, 7 p.m. And hopefully we'll be talking about environmental racism. Have a great night. Have a good month. Bye now.
Thanks, everybody. Have
Thanks.
a great night.
Good night,
Thank
everyone.
you. Good night,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thanks so very much. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Okay.
Good night. Thank you. Thanks, Kerwin.